and content that their rights are protected, content they can continue to operate their business, and content that we as an economy can continue to move forward. When you look at what's happening to our the economy of Nova Scotia, we've debated in this House, disagreed a lot on numbers being tossed around. I think there's one thing all of us can probably agree on, and that is there is a level of uncertainty, and it's not just about employment, it's about people's investments, equity in properties, whether or not there's, you know, with all of the downturn that's been happening globally and the stuff that's happening in the U.S., the downturn in the U.S. housing market has had such an impact on our economy. When you look at the gypsum mines that are closing, the issue around exporting lumber into the United States, all of that has had a real impact on the worry for Nova Scotia families. And so when you think about that, and you think about the companies that have been discussed, and you know, we focused an awful lot on Michelin, Sobeys, and Clearwater, but there are others who do a tremendous amount of work internationally. There's actually a company in my riding that actually makes race car motors, and they ship them all over the U.S. But there's all kinds of smaller operations, might be 20 people, 30 people, 40 people that are employing Nova Scotians, working hard, exporting, that of all the things that they need to be focusing on at this point, this is probably not at the top of their list. But even if government, you know, and even if it is at the top of the list for government, and that's government's right and choice, that to find a level of compromise that would have taken some of that uncertainty for employers off the table, and quite frankly for some employees. It's not just employers, employees, because I know, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, how surprised I was at the volleyball tournament in Middleton that a constituent of mine came up to me whose husband works at Michelin. They were very happy at the way Michelin has treated them. They've been very happy with that, and they were concerned about the uncertainty that a piece of legislation seems to be causing the president of Michelin, and Michelin, I think, International. So if we'd been able to have that free and open collective conversation prior to coming to where we are today in this House, where the government has the hammer, and we're going to get first contract arbitration, I think we could have avoided some of that anxiety that Nova Scotians are feeling, workers and employees. You know, I think we'd all be surprised when we actually hear and listen to what is coming forward out of this piece of legislation. And it's far-reaching, you know. And I think it's important. This piece of legislation is, in my view, really goes against the spirit of collective bargaining. I've said this before. If an employee and employer wants to go to arbitration, that's something they negotiate at the table. I do believe, and I congratulate people who work Department of Labor. I do believe that we need a mechanism to ensure that if either one of those two parties is bargaining in bad faith, that we have a mechanism that forces them to the table, that forces either to continue to negotiate or a settlement. But I think before we take that drastic step, before we go against what is free and open collective bargaining, you'd better make sure that we'd exhausted all other possibilities. And I don't think that's what this bill does. This bill actually leaves, and it's really and I can't think of it any other way than the clock ticking. And as we get to the end of the time, we just bring in a third party to settle it. there's just something not right about that. It's not right for the employer, and it's not right for the employees. And I think most people get that. I think even the employees get that, and I think they know that there has to be some level of a balance around this piece of legislation. You know, I'm very proud of the community that I live in. I've had a wonderful opportunity to be raised there myself and to be able to raise our kids there. And I'm thinking about this piece of legislation, and I'm wondering how this improves the lives of my constituency of Annapolis. How will this, what impact will this have on job creation in Annapolis? Not a single person has come to me and said, this is going to give me more hope, take away any anxiety I might have, make me feel more secure in my employment. But ironically, as I said a minute ago, I've had some flip do the opposite about seeing some uncertainty around this piece of legislation. And as always, when you go through this, whether it's first contract arbitration, whether it's bills we're going to talk about, we've already talked about, continue to talk about, you always figure there has to be a benefit to it in order for I think it to be good legislation. There has to be a positive benefit for the people of the province. And when we look at Bill 102, no one can really identify the positive for the people of Nova Scotia. As I said earlier, the title, An Act to Prevent Unnecessary Labor Disruptions and Protect the Economy. Well, we haven't had any unnecessary labor disruptions in first contract. Been three. And there was a mechanism in place to deal with. So when you look at the bill, you say, well, where's the positive? Where's the good part for Nova Scotia? When your major employers are saying this is going to affect future investment, it's going to affect our ability to go to our parent companies to bring back revenue, to invest in Nova Scotia, to grow jobs, to put more Nova Scotians to work, you're left struggling to find the benefit. You know, and I guess from our perspective, in recognizing where government is in the position of a majority government, if you need first contract arbitration for some other reason, to speak to the base, to do whatever, then let's work on a model that's receptive by the majority of leaders in the labor movement and leaders in business, in the private sector, who are non-unionized. When we debated Bill 100, we were told that the Labor Management Review Committee would have no impact. All the decisions made by that committee wouldn't impact on non-unionized labor. And quite honestly, this bill impacts really just the opposite. It has an impact on those that aren't unionized, and it's really a certification bill. And I think in order to alleviate some of the concerns that we're hearing, and I think for government to be able to say we've delivered and listened at the same time, a move away from the Manitoba model would make sense. It really would be a win-win. It really would be a win-win for government. You'd be able to say that we've not only have we delivered on our commitment to whoever to bring in first contract arbitration, but we also listened at law amendments, and that we're going to move to a more moderate approach to first contract arbitration, one that the majority of Canadians are under now, as opposed to the Manitoba model, which only 4% of the Canadian population serves under. That would be a great opportunity for government to be able to say to Nova Scotians, we've done things differently. We've responded. We've listened. And we'd welcome that. We'd welcome it. I'm sure, I'm certain. I was in when I listened to Sobeys. I know Clearwater expressed the same amendments. And that makes a lot of sense. And I also know that the leadership of the labor movement would be okay with it. They were expressing their issues around first contract arbitration. Yes, just like there's some employers who don't want anything to do with first contract arbitration, there are some union leaders who don't want anything to do with moving off the Manitoba model. But, you know, we don't create legislation for both ends of the spectrum. We should create legislation for the moderate middle, for the people who know how to compromise, for the people who recognize that, you know what, change is a-coming, and I want to help to be part of it and help shape it, and recognize it is important for us as a province to have and continue that kind of positive relationship that employer and employees have had for generations. When we think about the fact that you know, Clearwater, Sobeys, the Braggs, there are a number of other entrepreneurs in this province who do business globally, but they've chosen our province, their province of birth, to be their headquarters, to be the place they run their operations out of, to be the place where they hire the majority of their people. You know, Sobeys hires 10,000 Nova Scotians. 3,500 work for Michelin, 1,100 work at Clearwater. I don't know how many work at the Bragg operation in Oxford and through Eastlink. It's a lot of Nova Scotians employed by Nova Scotians. Pretty impressive, really, when you think about that. But they grew their business, I think, probably beyond their own imagination. But you know what? They never outgrew Nova Scotia. They never grew beyond us because they believed in our province. They believed in the work that their parents had put in and their grandparents. You know, that's the kind of Nova Scotians we should be chatting with. You know, I'm going to surprise most of the hosts when I say this, because I give them a hard time most of the time, but I think Rick Clark is one of those Nova Scotians that we should sit down with. I think he has a very passion for this province. Well, we don't always agree on the direction where we might want to go, but I think if we could sit Rick down with the Sobeys or Dana LeBlanc, or sitting down at Oxford Frozen Foods, or sitting down with Colin McDonald at Clearwater, I think we'd be surprised at the kind of compromise they would find. And that's why I believe we should have engaged them in before we drafted this bill of first contract arbitration, the Manitoba model. It is important that we look for the middle ground, that we speak to the moderate middle. The vast majority of us will compromise. Mr. Chair, how much time do I have? Well, I want to get ready to finish up my presentation, but I think this is a real opportunity for government. It is one that I think we can send a signal to a number of people. I think you can send a signal to the labor movement that we're going to deliver first contract arbitration, and we're going to deliver what is a moderate version of it. And I think it will send a signal to the business community that you've listened, and that we're going to bring in and find a moderate level of first contract arbitration that works for all of us. Because, you know, I think we, you know, regardless of where you are, whether you're the head of the union or the head of a corporation, you recognize in order to have some success, there has to be a coming together of the minds and a will to proceed forward, which has been our history. If you look at some, ironically, in this province, some of the toughest labor issues have been with government. have been with government, not with private sector. Most private sector employers who are unionized do very well with negotiations. The employers I've mentioned who have part of their operations certified in other areas do the same. When we start thinking about this and move towards, remember that there's a basic principle of free and open collective bargaining. In my view, this Manitoba model is absolutely against that basic principle. It takes it right out of their hands and moves it to a third party. Takes away their ability to settle and find some agreement. And ironically, in Manitoba, the arbitrator settles more than any other setup. It's rather interesting when you start looking and digging into it. And it's unfortunate that we would be adopting that model. And I think from government's perspective, the host's perspective, that if we amended that piece of legislation, would show the principles of free collective bargaining, that we had people on both ends of the spectrum digging in, we had the middle ground showing up, we saw government on one side, opposition on the other, dug in, we go to law amendments, and we have a conversation. And employers and employees come in, make their case, union leaders come in and make their case, and lo and behold, we all give a little, and we can all say we want a little bit, and Nova Scotia is better off. I want to encourage the minister to think about that as we move forward from the Manitoba model. That law amendments gives us an opportunity to put in practice the concept of free collective bargaining, where we sit down at the table, negotiate our positions, and find that moderate middle ground. And this is government's opportunity to say they've listened and responded. And with those few remarks, Mr. Chair, I will take my place and listen to the remainder of that debate.
Thank you. I now recognize the member for Dartmouth North.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm pleased again to rise in my place and speak to Bill 102, an act to prevent unnecessary labour disruptions and protect the economy. Mr. Chair, it was a week ago that many of us stood in our places or in hopes of getting government to listen to our voices, and also to encourage the business community from around the province to come out and make presentations to Law Amendments Committee in hopes that their voices would be heard. And Mr. Chair, I'd like to personally congratulate all the presenters that took the time out of their busy schedules to come out and participate in that form of democracy. And one presenter, Mr. Chair, really stood out for me, and I know the member from Sackville, Cobequid, and the member from Hammonds Plains, Upper Sackville, are very familiar with this business owner. And I want to read a quote, and the quote actually, this quote actually came from the Chronicle Herald last April. And the title of the article reads, "Government Rules Killing Forestry," says Barrett. A Nova Scotia businessman with more than 60 years experience in the forestry sector says government rules and regulations are slowly killing his industry. David Barrett of Barrett Lumber Company in Beaverbank has written a letter to Premier Darrell Dexter and other political leaders outlining his frustrations. Over the past few years... Order.
It's the Premier and...
I'm quoting the article.
Okay.
Still can't quote?
Okay.
Sorry. Would you like me to read it again without... Okay. David Barrett of Barrett Lumber Company in Beaverbank has written a letter to Premier and other political leaders outlining his frustrations. Over the past few years, Barrett said his company has seen its workforce shrink from 75 to 40 people. Now, Mr. Chair, this is the important quote from last April 1st that is very pertinent to what we're having take place in this House and under this current government with Bill 102. Mr. Barrett goes on to express, "I'm angry, and the purpose of this letter is to bring the issue to the table, to at least have them discuss it, so that they know when they pass a law, they better damn well look at the end result, because there won't be anybody in Nova Scotia working in the forest industry," he said Friday, and I'll table that. So, Mr. Speaker, Mr. Barrett's comments around the law, a law is being passed and government understanding the full outcome of the law is very, what we're seeing here is very, very disappointing. And his comments back last April obviously weren't heard, because he goes on again and after his presentation, and it was quoted again, and I'll table this as well, Mr. Chair. It's fair to say there's been some change in the legislature's Law Amendments Committee over the last 46 years, but it hasn't been for the better, one veteran presenter said last week. David Barrett, who owns and operates Barrett Lumber Mill and Beaverbank with his two brothers, was back at the committee to voice his opposition to first contract settlement legislation. He said he first went to the committee meeting back in 1965. At that time, G.I. Smith was the chairman, and I had the feeling that the law amendments and government was listening, Barrett recounted. Now, Mr. Chair, what I've been reading, he states in the paper about this proposed legislation, you made up your mind, you're going to ram it through, you don't care what happens, and it just makes me cynical, more cynical. And I'll table that, Mr. Chair. And if we think about those comments from Mr. Barrett last April in regards to the government's decisions and regulations in the forestry industry, and his comments around the laws being pushed through and government not really understanding the full scope of what they're trying to attempt to make changes to, and then to have him come here a short time later and have him leave this house with a bad taste in his mouth, not just about us as lawmakers, but about the future of Nova Scotia. It's very, very concerning, Mr. Chair. We heard yesterday, last evening, the member from Glace Bay talk about contact centers. And the fact that Stream, which, you know, is a call center that's been successful for over 10 years, and the employees have been very happy, and they receive good benefit packages, and the importance of that contact center to that community. 1,000 jobs, Mr. Chair. If those jobs were to even remotely be risked, again, rural Nova Scotia would be looking at taking a tremendous hit, and in particular, that part of Cape Breton. There's not many opportunities for people to have skilled positions, unfortunately, in that part of Cape Breton. It would be devastating. Well, Mr. Chair, in the area of Dartmouth North, I also have a large contact center, and it's one that's been there and has been successful for a number of years, Convergys, and it currently employs somewhere in the vicinity of 600 plus people. And I can tell you that if there was rumblings, or if in the event that a union had gone in there and into the contact center, and recognizing, Mr. Chair, that some contact centers in the province are unionized, but these folks are working with the global economy, and we're talking labor dollar per hours, and that's what government needs to understand for some of these companies that come in and set up. And if they weren't able to deal with the plight of the employee and the unions, you know, it's safe to say that they would pack up. And Mr. Chair, if Convergys in Highfield Park, 600 people found themselves out of jobs, it would also affect our community. The multi-unit dwellings in Highfield Park have many of the employees living there. So you would have a good chunk of my community empty out very quickly, and it would be very, very difficult as an MLA to go to them and say, well, we've listened. I remember when I sat with the members on the government side, I used to have a moniker that I used to state, and it was that Nova Scotians deserve better, and a new Democrat is someone who will listen. Well, Mr. Chair, we asked the business community to come here last week and plead their case in hopes that government would adhere to or listen to some of the amendments that might be proposed. And it seems that today we know that in short time, their comments will have fallen on deaf ears. I remember sitting in a meeting a number of years ago with the now Premier and Robbie Shaw, a very successful business person in Nova Scotia. And I remember Mr. Shaw saying to the Premier, the now Premier, that New Democrats And your members need to get out into the business community and actually experience what we deal with as far as making a meeting payroll, dealing with turnover, dealing with efficiencies in our businesses. And I still remember those comments because, you know, there are currently some members on that side that have owned their own businesses and have had some success. But today, 80% of Nova Scotia being employed in non-unionized sector, their voices aren't being heard here. And I think that's a sad message that government isn't going to be here, because in 2009 we elected a government that came in on a movement of change. And when I was campaigning in 2009, you know, there was a common thread on the doorstep that was being sown. We want to give you a chance, but don't raise our taxes and don't give all the money to social programs. Well, we've seen a few of those things take place, Mr. Chair. But today we're here to talk about the business community and the fact that Bill 102, what Bill 102, I mean, we can sit here and say, well, no, that's not going to happen. But in the global economy right now, we can't, no business can take a risk or even a threat. And the member from Yarmouth last evening talked about, you know, having our business community feeling confident. And the business climate has to be confident for investors to come in and businesses that already operate here to even potentially think about growth. Well, Bill 102 doesn't do any of that. It's, you know, if we think back to the last time Michelin had an opportunity, I don't know the numbers exactly, Mr. Chair, but I believe the vote to unionize was pretty close. It was pretty close. And the fact that we open ourselves up to that possibility with such a large employer in Nova Scotia, Mr. Chair, is quite alarming that the government would actually dangle that out there, considering the amount of job losses that we've had. Last Thursday evening, I spoke about the middle of the 2009 campaign when the orange wave was sweeping, and it was really starting to look like the New Democrats were going to form government. There was a different tone I was getting from people on the doorstep, and one of the things that I brought up last Thursday was the fact that I was being questioned on the Michelin bill and whether or not the now Premier would be tampering with it. And I said last week that I was hoping that, or wishing that I could have had that briefing note. But I remember going to the doorsteps of a number of those concerned people, going back to them when I had that briefing note in my hand, saying that no, that the now Premier was not going to be tampering with it. When a lot of the press around this very Bill 102, Mr. Chair, started to build last week, we had some comments, and I want to read a comment from a viewer online with one of the newsprint medias, and I'll table this from the Chronicle Herald. And it's titled, "NDP Out to Get Michelin." And this gentleman's comments, or this lady's comments, said, "I asked several NDP candidates if they would repeal the Michelin bill before the last election. They all played dumb. Some even said they never heard of it. Well, look out, here they come. There's a strategy behind all this. They will drag down Michelin somehow. As an employee, I prefer to do my own negotiating, not some shop steward or union boss. If I'm not happy, or after a few years can't get myself promoted, I'll go somewhere else. And it won't be a company that fell victim to a union." And I'll table that, Mr. Chair. So now we're hearing things from all sides, Mr. Chair. We're hearing from the business community. We're hearing from employees. And I know that, you know, there's been a lot of talk around the two large employers like Sobeys and Michelin. And I guess, you know, when we listen to somebody like Sobeys, the largest employer in the private sector, 10,000 people plus, you know, I'm sure over the years there might have been some disgruntled employees, people that didn't get promotions or got, you know, looked over. But overall, Sobeys has been very successful. Successful enough to expand in here in Nova Scotia and take some of those opportunities to move elsewhere across Canada. And I guess my point, and having a the grocery industry background that I do, Mr. Chair, I tried to paint a little bit of the picture last week, but I'm going to do it again here today, just so that hopefully some of the government members understand, where Sobeys or the result of having this first contract legislation put through would have on Sobeys, and not just the management of Sobeys or the shareholders that have bought stock in Sobeys, but it would also have effect on everyday Nova Scotians. And last week I talked about the price of food. The fact that food costs in Nova Scotia have rose drastically in the last 2 years. And for the most part in the grocery industry here, we've had two major players that, we had some of the best prices across Canada because of the competition. But Bill 102 gets passed through and things take place, and everybody deserves a fair wage for fair work, and I totally agree with that. But if Sobeys finds themselves in a predicament where wages are going up, well, they have to recoup that cost somewhere. High fuel costs, trucking creates a problem with the food costs, so food costs go up there. But if wages become an issue, Mr. Chair, it's kind of, we're dangling this opportunity out there for the employees, and we're saying this is good for them, and we've heard that from some of the government members in some of the comments they've made. But eventually what happens is a couple things. Sobeys might have to lay some people off. Sobeys might have to raise food costs. And when we know that there's a number of Nova Scotians now just struggling to put food on the table, let alone healthy food, Mr. Chair, that causes me to have some concern. The grocery industry in Nova Scotia operates on about a 1% margin. And Mr. Chair, to lose any percentage of that to an organization like Sobeys is not good for them, for their bottom line, and it's not good for the employee. And being a former manager in the retail sector, I know that when head office gets the hold of your numbers at the end of the month, one of the very first things they come down to you with, Mr. Chair, is labor dollar per hour. And it's up to management to find a way to be creative, to get people to entice them to work harder, work longer. But that number is always dangled out there, and it's because of the bottom line and profit. And if you don't have profit, you're not going to expand, and jobs aren't going to be created. Mr. Chair, I want to read another online quote from November 29, 2011 from the Herald. Government for the people, not. Michelin's official stand with unions is that a union is not required when there is a good company management team in place on site. Italy's unions started making unreasonable demands, and Michelin simply moved some tire lines to other countries, effectively wiping out half of Italy's production and workforce. The unions got the message, but it was too late. Here in the Americas, Michelin just invested billions in new anti-union facilities in Brazil and in the States. Stroke of the pen would send some of our production to these new plants. My point, Mr. Premier, is well aware of the above and what Michelin will almost certainly do if Michelin employees utilize this new legislation. And I'm not going to finish that quote, but I'll table it because I think that's enough said. The fact that we have an unstable economy right now begs the question as to why. And as been stated by many other members in the House, we haven't exactly heard. And some of the presenters that we heard last week, Mr. Chair, they were befuddled. They hadn't been properly told. I remember there was one presenter, Ms. Cruikshanks, that actually said, well, to start with, she was part of that group that had their times changed 4 or 5 different times and locations changed. And she was very frustrated when she came to the mic that day in law amendments. And I remember her talking about how appreciative she was to have the study day, although she did say she would have liked to have had more notice, as would many of the other businesses, because these folks are running operations, they're managing employees, and just to be mandated to take this certain time out, they need a month's notice would have been great. But Ms. Cruikshank said that when she entered the room, it was like going to a union rally. And she kind of figured right then and there that this wasn't going to be a discussion about the benefits of first contract or her having the opportunity to speak on behalf of her representatives. It became about a union agenda, and that left her with a very bad taste in her mouth, Mr. Chair. One of the other things Ms. Cruikshank said is that she couldn't figure out why, that it wasn't necessary. And I know that, when we think about the Irving bid that we have and the opportunity that we have, they're going to need help, and every other little business along the way that's going to participate in that bid over the years is going to need help. They're going to need a government that's going to come to them with a clear message. You know, we had the NDP come in 2009 and bring about a manufacturing tax credit. On one hand, that's a good thing. But here we are today, 2 years later, we're going to slap them with first contract legislation, and as we've heard from a number of members, especially the member from Cumberland South, speak about a lot of the small manufacturers in Nova Scotia that are, you know what? They're going to pack up shop potentially if they are going to become fully unionized. So, Mr. Chair, Bill 102, an act to prevent unnecessary labor disruptions, well, we know that's not taking place right now. There hasn't been for a number of years. But I think the most important thing that I'm struggling with understanding why from this government and why now is the fact that they also have there to protect the economy. Give on one hand, take on the other, Mr. Chair. Mr. Chair, I know, I find it ironic as well that November 22nd, there was a launch of a new workforce strategy, and it's to accompany the Jobs Here program. And the Premier went out and spoke, and I'm going to quote from the government's website his actual speech. He spoke in Dartmouth at a very successful manufacturer, Advanced Precision. And I'm going to just read a couple quotes here in the beginning of his speech that are real important. Thank you for joining us for this announcement. It's good to see so many familiar faces. Special thanks to Chris Fitzpatrick, owner of Advanced Precision, and his team for welcoming us here today. For a number of reasons, Advanced Precision is the ideal setting to launch Nova Scotia's workforce strategy. It's a company that has taken advantage of workplace education training and incentives to help their employees to develop more skills and better skills. Theirs is exactly the kind of thinking all Nova Scotia employers should have. They understand an investment in their people is an investment in the future, and I'll table that, Mr. Chair. That was from the workforce announcement back in November, Mr. Chair. Ironically, November 28th, Mr. Chair, a number of us, and along with the Premier and the Minister of Labour and Advanced Education, received another email. That email came through to our offices, and it looked like a standard letter that we've been getting from a lot of these companies around the province. But this one was different. This one went on to explain and express the fact that, this gentleman actually had concerns around the construction industry. And when we talk about ships start here and the Irving bid and people moving back home and the construction industry has a real opportunity to have a boom here in Nova Scotia. But Mr. Chair, this email was sent out by Chris Fitzpatrick, the president of Advanced Precision, the very president that the Premier had been out to, and I'm just wondering if that day the Premier would have took Mr. Fitzpatrick aside and talked to him about his beliefs in how first contract was going to affect and assist this gentleman's future bids and future contracts and future abilities to put funding and monies into upgrading the skills of his employees and further hiring more employees. I'm wondering if that conversation even took place, how that would have went. Because obviously after getting this email, which I'm going to table, Mr. Chair, Mr. Fitzpatrick appreciated the platitudes on that day, but afterwards, once he found out and realized the ramifications of Bill 102, I think he'd like to have another conversation with the now Premier, and I'll table that email. Mr. Chair, Bill 102 has also seen and had some questions asked to it by the Chambers of Commerce across the province. And we just heard the member, the leader of the official opposition, speak to the fact that the Labour Management Review Committee didn't come to a consensus on this, and his belief, and many of us on this side of the House's belief, that it was indeed the fact that it is coming forward in the form of the Manitoba model, the most regressive form of first contract. And the Chamber's done everything they can do. They participated in the day of study. They've written to the minister, and they had a question, and it's a viable question. It's a good question to have answered. You know, we went through the process of bringing in Bill 100 and seeing the adversarial position that government took against the 80% of non-unionized sector in this province. And Bill 100 kind of started this, let's say, this dance. And now we're here with Bill 102. And the Chamber of Commerce questioned as to whether or not, or why, this would be the very first piece that would come to that Labour Review Committee. And of course, we know, Mr. Chair, that this committee is made up of no members from the non-unionized sector, even though government did make an amendment to allow them to participate. But there's no sitting member that actually gets to review or make presentations to the government. But the Chamber said that there was some other things. And this was an article that came in Business Voice in the middle of November. And I just want to read these 3 points. These 3 points would have been great for this Labour Review Committee to look at right in the beginning. The Chamber of Commerce said, evaluating our labour relations experiences, including the performance of the Labour Board, and establishing best practices and benchmarks was a good one to start with. Reviewing the role of conciliation services with the review to providing support earlier in the process of negotiating a first collective agreement. That could have been good. Or exploring whether the Trade Union Act should give the Labour Board the ability to make interim decisions. All very good ideas that this review committee could have looked at, but we're looking at the Manitoba model, and I'll table that as well.
Order. Just want to comment on some of the documents that have been tabled by the honourable member from Dartmouth North. Just having had a look at them, I should just remind the House and the member that documents that are tabled in the House have to have a complete information, including the author, identification of the author, and if the author can't be identified, then the letter can't be read from, cited, or tabled in the House itself. So if you are going to submit these letters, then those letters should include that information. The basic principle involved is that when documents are put, they should not be altered or changed. They should be verifiable. And so concealing their origins or not including their origins violates those principles. So I would ask then that none of those, if the documents do not identify the author, that they should be withdrawn, and that these documents that are tabled, I think, that do not identify the author will also have to be withdrawn. Thank you.
Well, perhaps, Mr. Chair, we can have the government look into regulating online submissions, because I didn't, as you made comment, try to alter any of the documents. I pulled them offline, as many of us have in the past. But I'm done with those quotes. I think I've made my points. the message, I guess, the business community, Mr. Chair, is trying to get through to the government is, you know, like Mr. Barrett states, you know, the end result, the full scope of when we bring in legislation and we pass laws, the full scope and ramifications of those very laws, the impact that it's going to have, not just now, but in future. And as I made my comments last Thursday, this I believe is not the change that Nova Scotians voted for, at least not the majority. We expected something different, and what we see right now with Bill 102 is exactly what people had expected of the NDP. And it's okay to give and take, and unions have been good. We're not operating today, Mr. Chair, in the same type of labor unrest as we've seen in the past. And none of the presenters that came here to the House and took time out of their busy schedules could understand why, and they haven't been told why. But I'll tell you, it's going to be a real loud message that this government is going to hear in the coming, as soon as this bill is proclaimed, as we know it will be, and probably as quick. It'll probably be one of the quicker bills that we see proclaimed. The movement's going to start. And Ms. Cruikshanks in her speech talked about certification, as did the member of Annapolis. And I just made mention that I don't know the exact numbers, but I believe the vote was pretty close last time at Michelin. And if government allows, which they are going to, this is going to be their legacy. And as the member from Cumberland South made comments last evening, it's going to take another government to come in and rectify this. And again, I speak to change and what we voted for. We were going to do things different. And as I have stood in my place many times, Mr. Chair, and said, why not get it right the first time? Well, this Bill 102 isn't even necessary. It's definitely not protecting the economy, and there's definitely no labor unrest. And what we have is an NDP government going to create what it very well sets out not to do. And they're going to create labor unrest. And it's too late when it's gone. There's no fix. I mean, we went in and we saved Bowater last week. And there's 2,000 families that are happy. There's a number of those union members that got voted out and decided to help out the company by losing their jobs. I bet they're wishing that they could come back. And had some of that money's been put in place, allowed Bowater to bring those individuals back, I know I would have been happier. But what happens if a Michelin goes? What happens if Sobeys starts to slowly pull up roots? And you know, it's just a trickle effect. It could be a trickle effect, Mr. Chair, that we won't see for a number of years, but it's going to happen. And it's going to happen in the very place that we don't need it right now, where many of these businesses are located, and that's rural Nova Scotia. And as I stated last week, Mr. Chair, the fact that the NDP government has a number of members who were successful in the 2009 campaign that came out of rural Nova Scotia, that very fact alone makes me nervous. That their voices aren't being heard, and as we heard from the Premier today in question period, we heard that those members are supportive of this. And I'm just wondering, have they taken that time? Have they taken the time to go into those businesses? And I know the member of Queens has a number, you know, and when I look at the Liverpool area alone, 2 large grocery chains in a small little town. Bowater hits another bump 4 or 5 years down the road. The mom and pop shops close up. Nobody wants to come in and invest because we haven't created that positive, confident environment in the business community. Which government's going to throw money? And how are we going to have the money to throw at them? If contact centers like Stream and Glace Bay close up, and what if it happens under the mandate of this government? Whether we're here for another 6 months, another year, unless they fulfill their full mandate and go the full term, What if during that time Stream decides to pull out, or Convergys in New Glasgow, or Convergys in Highfield Park? The question, I guess, for government is what would they do then? What's the Premier going to do? The Minister of Economic and Rural Development. Great work job. The IEB, the IEF, the slush fund situation going to come in? Are we going to rescue them? We can't. Because then everything else suffers. And some of the, I look at some of these contact centers over the years, there's payroll rebates that are involved. I look at the Scanwood situation. We threw them for $4.5 million, and when we lost 14 workers after they received that funding through the Industrial Expansion Fund, the Premier simply said, well, it's only 14, at least we kept 40. Well, soon after that, Scanwood took that money, and a lot of people ended up out of jobs, and many in my community. And when they see the way money's being thrown around, and we hear the member from Yarmouth who's been here a year and a half now and been very passionate about the cat situation, yeah, it flies in the face of everybody in that community, questioning why. And what I see is, again, a government that doesn't, I don't think that they fully understand business. I don't think they fully understand business. And, when I look at the cat situation, maybe we knew something more going in. And the complaint about the cat...
Order. I'd encourage the member to come back to the bill and clause 1. Thank you.
When we look at situations like that and government doesn't have a plan, when they decide to cut and they don't have a plan, it creates uncertainty in the business community and in our communities. Mr. Chair, what are the priorities of jobs here? Helping businesses be more competitive globally. And we know that the Premier's been on a number of business junkets, as well as the Minister of Rural and Economic Development and Tourism. They travel the world promoting Nova Scotia. And I'm wondering, on the next junket that they take, and on the next deals that they go in to make and encourage individuals and companies to come here set up, if they're going to take this Bill 102 with them, and how that conversation's going to go. Well, we have an excellent workforce, an educated workforce. We have a wonderful lifestyle that we enjoy here in Nova Scotia. It's scenic. We have time zones that benefit businesses. Oh, and by the way, we have Bill 102. And I made comments last week in regards to Maurice Guiton and Composites Atlantic and the fact that, they've been very successful over the years, and government has applauded them and acknowledged them for their success. And in conversations I've had with Mr. Guiton, he made that statement. Yeah, the unions came in 3 or 4 or 5 times. And our people said, no, you treat us like family. You give us fair wage for fair work and a benefit package that not just benefits the individual, but their families. What are we risking? And the sky's not falling, Mr. Chair. It's simply put, this is one more piece, probably the final piece that unions need, the big unions need to come in and set up. And I'll go back to, the Law Amendments Committee last week, and I had the opportunity to hear from Mr. McGregor from Pictou County, and in business for over 50 years, and he said the very fact that an arbitrator is going to come in from outside, know nothing about my business, take in none of my concerns, and just merely dictate what I'm to pay. You want to know why business is up in arms? Business can't afford to do that. They don't react that way. And when we're looking at jobs here in the initiative global economy, who's going to come here and invest? Well, the Premier's going to have a difficult time, as is the Minister, to convince organizations and businesses and individuals to come here and set up in Nova Scotia, because we're not going to have a competitive market. I know Stephen Lund from NSBI makes a statement that we're not competing with Moncton or PEI, we're competing globally. Well, what does Bill 102 do for us? Michelin's global, Stream's a global contact center. And we've heard how they feel about Bill 102, Mr. Chair. I guess if I sum it all up is, there's a reason why I find myself in this place over here, on this side of the House, and I can live with that. But what I can't live with is the fact that this government and this Premier is not sending a clear message to all Nova Scotians, especially to the very business community that he and his colleagues strive so poignantly to be involved with over the last 3 or 4 years. They wanted to be involved. Most of the donations that come to the NDP are from the grassroots, people that have supported them over the years. And of course the unions has been made mention by the opposition parties. The one piece that they were missing to get over the top was the business community, and they made an effort. But again, if I go back to the manufacturing tax credit, which was a great thing, a very good thing, and now 2 years later we're doing Bill 102, which flies right into the face of those very people. People like Mr. Fitzpatrick, Advanced Precision, who welcomed the Premier for a nice presentation, an announcement, a photo op, and then a couple days later for all of us to receive an email that states, I don't agree with this, I don't understand this, this is not the time, this is not good for my business. And the Premier, in his opening address, made a comment, made an actual statement that said this is the kind of company that has done well and other companies should believe in and listen to. I'm wondering if the Premier's listening right now. Because like I said, I know he got CC'd that very email that I got emailed. I think we're going down the wrong road. There is no labor unrest. I'm worried about the economy. And the very fact that when Bill 102 gets proclaimed, the possibility, the very possibility, even if remote possibility, that we see other organizations become unionized, and that threat. And the fact that labor dollar per hour is going to increase, and businesses are going to have to take that into account, and bottom lines aren't going to be as flush as they once were. And yes, Mr. Chair, everyone deserves fair wage for fair work. This is not the path, this is not the legacy that the new Democratic government want to go down and have. But they will be remembered. And in short time, Nova Scotians will make it clear. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you very much. I now recognize the member for Hants West.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm pleased to join in for just a few minutes probably this evening on debate. I don't think I'll take all that long, but I see one of the ministers over there looking. Maybe he wants me to go a little longer than that. I'm just not sure, but we'll add a few comments to what's been said already, and we know we've heard a lot from the members on this side of the House. Unfortunately, we've not heard anything from that side of the House, which is, I guess, not uncommon with this government. Lots of noise, yes, Mr. Chair, lots of noise, and I understand you've had to quiet it down a couple of times for the course of the afternoon, and that's understandable. But, you know, Mr. Chair, we have heard from a lot of businesses. We've heard different members stand today and last night into the later hours and talk about a number of businesses around the province that came before law amendments after this bill went through second reading and went over and had the rightful discussion that it should have had. There was a number of opinions expressed, which is what law amendments is all about. Unfortunately, there doesn't seem to be much value in law amendments on this particular bill because the government has an agenda and they plan to put this bill through, and they have a majority, and the people gave them that majority, and they have the right to do just that. We have to accept that. But, Mr. Chair, we can take the time that is required. We can take the time that is required to speak to this bill at length and get across the opinions of those that have come to us, both in this House and outside with emails and in our offices and on the phone, and certainly those who have come to our caucus office, those that have come to law amendments, as I have mentioned, Mr. Chair, and to express their opinions, carry the message that this is the wrong bill for this province. It's not needed. As I spoke earlier, a week or so ago now, I forget just exactly when it was, but some time back, about, well, about a variety of things, but about this bill, Mr. Chair, and how this isn't about, we hear a lot of different talk about how this is a union issue versus a non-union issue. Well, this isn't really a union issue to me. I don't take any issue with the union specifically. As I said, I was a long-time member of a union and paid my union dues, signed my card, was part of that negotiation. And that is a good process, Mr. Chair, a very good process. One that takes time to get through if you're looking to get a good contract. And you should always be looking to get a good contract, especially that first one, Mr. Chair. It's a very, very, very important contract. And generally speaking, you have people in the workplace that are new to the union environment. It takes some time to get used to how that whole thing flows. Shop stewards, union presidents, and so on. And there's a process that is basically put in place, be regular policy and procedure for how collective agreements would be brought to debate and how they would be set, and lawyers on the opposing side, or not necessarily opposing side, but the employer's side, and the president and lawyers and so on for the union side. Sit down and go through this process, and it's a good process, and it's one that takes time to learn. And the last thing that I think that what we're hearing is that people don't want to rush that process. They want to be able to take the time. They should be taking the time to learn the process. It's like the rules of this House, Mr. Chair. There are a lot of rules in this very House that people don't understand. They're pretty simple. If you take the time to open that little green book up, or the book that Art Fordham wrote back some years ago, for the members that remember the late Art Fordham, very simple, laid out piece of work that describes how this House works. And I was glad to have a read of both of those so that we do understand this process. Collective bargaining is no different. It takes time to lay all those rules out, put them in place, and those rules are basically how the two sides will work. What the employer will do, what they will pay, generally speaking, the benefits they will provide, and of course what the employees will do for those benefits that come along with that collective bargaining and finally with that contract. Now, there are a lot of businesses out there in this province that are unionized, Mr. Chair, and there are a lot of businesses that are not. Generally speaking, the smaller businesses, I don't know what the number of employees would have to be, but some small shops are, I suppose, unionized. There would be a lot. We've heard from some over the last week or so. We've heard talk today again and last night about Michelin, and they employ a lot of people in this province. We know that they've been, I don't know how many times, 2, 3, 4 times now, 13 attempts to be unionized. They've said strongly that they oppose that, and that's fine. That's good for them. They obviously are happy with their employer. They're happy with the benefits and the salaries and stuff that go along with it. Well, happy might be a strong word. I don't use that in jest. Happy might be a strong word, but they accept the rules of that workplace. They accept the wages and they accept the benefits of that workplace, Mr. Chair, for what they are. And I'm told that they're a pretty good employer, and they offer a number of perks that go along with being employed there, you know, and that's a wonderful thing. There are other industries out there other than that. You know, we've heard about the Sobeys industry, Mr. Chair. We know what that's like. Some of those, though, at Sobeys, I believe, are unionized, and some maybe are not unionized. And that's fair, too. That's just fine. It's not about whether we're going to unionize or not, although that would be the intent of this bill in the minds of some. But that's okay, if that's what they want to do. That's democracy, Mr. Chair. They should be doing that. But there are a lot of small businesses, Mr. Chair, in the province of Nova Scotia that are asking questions about this, that are not interested whatsoever and wondering, where did this all come from? Why now? We don't need it right now. We don't need any of these issues right now, Mr. Chair. I had a gentleman come into my office Friday afternoon, I believe it was. And this gentleman, who I've mentioned before in this house, Willard Wood, Willard, his partner Edgar Card, own Moe's Music Store in the town of Windsor. Now, they are anxiously awaiting for the next election because they think maybe at that time that the Premier might come back to town, might come to Windsor. And instead of just going to the local paper and doing an ad, he might actually walk up the street again. And he might stop into some businesses and he might say hello. Because Mr. Wood would like to have the Premier come to his store. And he would like to talk to him about first contract arbitration, and I might also add, Mr. Chair, about a few other things. And he's a big man. He's twice my height, I'll say, Mr. Chair. He's a tall man. He got to bend down to get in the doors. I know some of the members opposite probably know Mr. Wood. He's a big man. And he said, I want the Premier to come into my store. And he said, you know, Chuck, he said, once he gets here, I'm not going to let him go until I have my say. So you can tell, Mr. Chair, that he wants desperately to speak to government. He wants to speak to the Premier. And he wants to tell him, this is not needed. There's a lot of things that aren't needed, and they're not happy with where we've gone in the last 2.5 years. He's only one example in the town of Windsor. There are lots, Mr. Chair. There are lots. Now, we're seeing businesses close, unfortunately. We've seen Fundy Gypsum. You know, there's some things you can't control, and they would be the first to say that, as would we. Tough economic times in the United States, where the bigger part of their market is. Mr. Chair, you can't do too much about that. There have been layoffs. We have to accept that. At the same time, that's tough for staff. They've been laid off. Some of them have gone back to school, trying to provide for their families, come up with something new, get into the job market. But what we're hearing, job losses, not job gains. Well, times are tough. They're trying to create their own thing. They want to stay here in Nova Scotia. They want to raise their families. They don't want to move away. They don't want to be going for 2 weeks or 3 weeks or whatever the deal is out somewhere else, coming back for 3 weeks. They want to live. They want to work here, Mr. Chair, and that's a good thing. It's good that they want to do that. But we know that people unfortunately have to do that to survive because there are no other options. Or at least they think there are no other options. Sometimes there are. Sometimes some of these people are able to go back to school and they're able to be educated. And the last thing they need is any further stress in their life. But what has happened, Mr. Chair? We've seen a lot of things happen. We see bills for no apparent reason come to the floor of this House. That worries them. When they talk about getting jobs, now they're going to have to pay more. They're already paying more in high energy costs. They're already paying more in taxes. We've seen 2% more go on. Those big purchases hurt, whether you got to buy a washer or a dryer or need to replace your vehicle, whether it's a new vehicle or even a used vehicle for that matter. Those are big purchases. The taxes, the 2% more on that, those hurt the everyday person trying to get along. And in a lot of cases, as we've heard earlier, Mr. Chair, today, as we've heard earlier, these are families with generally both husband and wife or partners that are working, maybe have a couple of kids, and they're struggling to get by because times are tough. They've either gone through a job loss, and maybe if they're lucky to get another job, or there's been, you know, difficult times before them. Increased taxes take more money out of their pockets. Those are the things in the coffee shops in Nova Scotia that people talk about. Those are the things that matter to them. A lot of high-level stuff they don't pay attention to. We all know. We all read the paper probably in here. There's a lot of people that read the paper. How many people are reading between the lines? How many people are reading everything? A lot of people look at the pictures and the captions. If it interests them, they read it. If it doesn't, they move on. We know that politics in general, from a poll that was done back some time ago, about 8% of the people pay attention to what goes on in the world of politics. It'd be nice if there was a lot more, given that they are the people that are making the decisions for them, Mr. Chair. But we've talked about this bill and supposedly strengthening the economy in this province. Well, I don't see that at all. That little extra piece was added on to a bill, Mr. Chair, that to mask it in some way, I guess, because it makes no sense. It has nothing to do with the bill in general at all. Now, it was interesting today. I had a phone call from a Valley radio station down my way in the Annapolis Valley. And after the interview and just before it's ended, the radio interviewer said to me, he said, all right, so let's throw this scenario out. He said, for some reason tomorrow, the Progressive Conservatives are back in power in the province of Nova Scotia. What would you do with this bill? I said, we'd never be having this discussion because we'd have never brought it forward, Mr. Chair, because it's a bad bill. It wouldn't need to be on this floor. We wouldn't have been through all this because we don't believe we need it. We believe there's a process in place in this province that has been a good process. Now, it doesn't matter what the process is. There are flaws in all kinds of negotiating processes. There are flaws in everything. Nothing is perfect. No one is perfect. And I don't think that anybody expects perfect. That's an awfully big, strong word. Nobody expects anyone to be perfect. They expect them to be fair. They expect them to be honest. They expect them to bargain in good faith. And we've had harmonious bargaining for years. Now, we have had, over the years, many years, some issues with regards to strikes. We are threatened at times with strike votes, as you know, and sometimes that comes to fruition and sometimes it doesn't, but it usually is that just that last bit to tip that negotiation either over to a conciliator or to an arbitrator and to finalize the deal. Now, I will say that when I was in law amendments one day last week, that there were a number of presenters for both pro and against this particular legislation. And it was interesting to hear one lady talk, and I wish I had the presentation. I don't have it, and I'm not going to read from it, but I will paraphrase. You might have even been there yourself, Mr. Chair. And she talked about, I believe she was from the NSGU, and I'm going to say perhaps, or one of those health units negotiating for the nursing homes. And I believe that she spoke very good, and she talked about collective bargaining, and they were into, I think, almost 2 years or right around the 2-year mark of bargaining. That's a long time. There's no question that that's a very long time. My question is, could you not fix that, though, somehow without having to bring a whole bill forward like this? Is that bargaining in good faith or bad faith? It doesn't sound to me like it's bargaining at all. There's obviously an issue there. 2 years is an awfully long time, and for some reason, that has existed, and that's very unfortunate. You know, if we want to put rules in place around good faith bargaining, call it what you want, we need to look at maybe there's a change required there. Is it another whole new bill, though? A change to the whole potential outlook on how bargaining should be done? You know, we believe, as I said, I believe solely having been there on both sides, for a management side, the employer side, and having been there as a shop steward to negotiate contracts and sit at that table. It's a long process. It can be frustrating. You have staff behind you that are wanting you to do one thing and taking the message and negotiating and trying to get it done as quickly as you can. And on the other side of things, you have management who are also at the table trying to get things done, and it always comes down, you know, to generally the financial piece, the vacation and the seniority and the things that matter, and obviously the hourly wage is always a big piece of that, Mr. Chair. Now, that takes some time, and that is always seems to be the final piece of any bargaining. How do you resolve that by way of first contract arbitration? I don't think that you do. Not if you're going to take the time and go through that it needs at all, Mr. Chair. There's nobody that has come to us and asked for this, not one business. I haven't even heard from a union person that says this is a good thing. And I know a lot of folks that are involved in a variety of unions. Not one of them have sent me an email. Not one of them have called my office. Not one of them have said a thing. Whether we're at coffee shops, we're at the rink, we're all over the place out home on the weekends and in the evenings. Not one person said, this is the right thing to do in Nova Scotia. But they are concerned about it. Not everybody brings it up, but there are people that do pay attention. Business owners specifically. Now, Willard says, okay, well, if this happens to come in and, you know, I've only got a couple of employees, but what if they decide that they want to unionize? Okay, they will. But what it means is exactly the same thing that the tax increase has done to them. It's taking away sales in business, because when you go into a music store, other than buying a music book, and I say, yeah, those are expensive too. You buy an instrument, you're paying a pretty good price. You know, you go and you buy a decent guitar today, you're going to pay $1,000. 15% on top of that hurts. And it will stop people from purchasing. Not will, has. We've seen a decline in those businesses. And that's, in the line item of big ticket items, that's one on the smaller scale. But to Mr. Wood and to Mr. Card, who own that store, they see a decline in business based on the economy in this province. So how does this bill protect the economy? It doesn't protect it one bit. Nothing has seemed to protect the economy. How were we protected from something like Fundy Gypsum, Mr. Chair? I can't see that there was any protection from that, because we've laid off 150 people in the last couple of years based on the economy. How could you protect that? There was no protecting that. They understood that. They didn't like it. They understood it. They knew that their business was solely dependent upon that market in the United States, the housing market. Some also believe, and are fairly confident, that those jobs will come back at some point. Now, the ore is still there, the resource is there, everything is there, the gear is there. There's still some people employed there, very few. 7, and they're mostly just keeping an eye on the place. Security and maybe some senior management, making sure that things get done. How long will that last? Well, it may last for another 2 or 3 years. So let's say that group comes back. There'll likely be, in all honesty, a whole new group, because a lot of these people have moved on. Some of them, I guess, were probably entitled to packages at the end of the day when they were laid off. Maybe some of them weren't. A lot of them had worked there 25, 30 years, and they're now 50, 55 years old. Some of them don't even have a grade 12. What do? They're looking for work. They're looking to be educated. They're going to adult high schools. They're taking courses. They're trying to figure out how they're going to get to that 60, 65 for the old age to kick in, and, you know, CPP, and maybe some of them will go on at 60 as we can. I'm sorry, Mr. Chair.
So I just want to encourage you to come back to the bill.
I thought I was on the bill, Mr. Chair. This has all got to do with protecting the economy, and that's exactly what I'm talking about. So I think that I'm not to argue with you at all, Mr. Chair. I just want to clarify that, in my opinion, I thought I was on the bill. But I'll come back to that maybe a little more clearly for you, Mr. Chair, just so that you are following me here a little bit. And again, as far as I was concerned, jobs, the economy, they're all one. Doesn't matter where the jobs are, Mr. Chair. But when them folks come back to work and they're hired, and this is where I was going with this, Mr. Chair, maybe it took me a little longer to get there than I wanted, it was you could see a union or whatever possibly forming there. You've got a whole new group of staff that could come in. What is that going to mean for an organization that employs 150, 200 people all coming back to work if things go boom in the United States? And at some point that will come back around. There's all kinds of history that says job creation will come back around, Mr. Chair, and it will. We're confident that it will. We have to have some hope. We have to be confident. But the sad side of that hope is the very fact that what are the risks? And there are lots of risks for individuals with this bill, Mr. Chair. Now, we talked about Sobeys and we talked about the Michelins, and there are thousands and thousands and thousands of people employed here. Is the intent of this bill to go out and unionize all of these organizations? Now, the government may say, no, 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 that's not the intent at all. But that is the belief, from what I've heard in this room in the last couple of weeks or so. Now into 3 weeks, I believe, of debate of this bill. That is what I've heard. Well, I want to go back to speaking about those unions and those corporations and this bill and how I think this could affect in a negative way the people, the businesses in this province. We cannot afford to lose one more job, one more business, but we're seeing them, the Hart Store in Windsor. Every week now for the last 3 weeks, the signs have been up 10%, 40%. This weekend was 50%. They're closing out because tough times economically. What does this bill do to protect the economy, Mr. Chair? Nothing. There's nothing in this bill that protects the economy. Even when this bill goes through and there's a new union formed, Mr. Chair, or unions that have already been in place for some time that are awaiting contract negotiations to be completed, what does that do to protect the economy of this province? Well, it doesn't do anything. They bang a contract through in 120 days, if that's what the bill says that it's in there, Mr. Chair. They bang it through, boom, there you go. And the first thing, you know what? Somebody's not going to be happy because they're never 100%. I don't know of a collective agreement that's been signed off at 100%, probably none. If they are, maybe they're rare. But you're going to tell an employer that you're going to pay this and you're going to give that, done. There you go. So if the company survives, and we hope that they will, because now we have to hope that they will, because this bill is going to pass. We are realists. We know that that's going to happen. We're not happy about that at all, and there's a lot of people that aren't happy, and we can't understand why, Mr. Chair, and I put a hoist motion before this very chamber last week in an effort to put this thing out. If this bill is so good, why didn't we, why didn't we give it the time that it needed? We heard 27 or 28 maybe come through law amendments. That's all we heard from. Plus numerous emails and phone calls that we don't have to pay attention to through that law amendment process of this bill. They accept the presenters for what comes. They judge them. They base them. And apparently it didn't make any difference at all, because this bill is still before this House, as far as I know, in the fashion that it was in. Now, I do know that amendments were talked about to this bill, Mr. Chair. Maybe some will come, maybe they won't. Either way, doesn't matter. Still Bill 102 does nothing for the economy to protect it whatsoever. Amendments are no good. This bill is not a good bill for Nova Scotia. So, Mr. Chair, we have other organizations out there, and we've heard, as I said, some of them mentioned. We have to think about what will this really mean in the end of the day for these people. As I said, this bill is going to go through. There will be nothing that we can do as legislators after it's done, as opposition members, I should say. There would be something to do that government could do to adjust it, to make it better. By way of amendments, there's no making it better. As I said, we don't support this bill in any way, shape, or form, amended or otherwise. This bill should never have been brought before the floor of this House, but it's here. It's going to go through, and it'll be interesting to see, Mr. Chair, what the words added onto this bill to protect the economy will mean when other companies are struggling. And we already know that there are other businesses in this province that are closing, that are struggling financially. We've seen a bill come forward in this House today to help another one. And those jobs are important, Mr. Speaker. Very important jobs. Every one of those jobs. I lost in my area again last week, Mr. Chair, 13 jobs that were announced that will be at Minus Base and Pulp and Power. What does this bill do to protect the economy, Mr. Chair? What does it do to protect those 13 people? It doesn't do anything. We talk about, you know, if you want to call it a trade union bill or whatever the title of the bill is, you know, the Trade Union Act, that's one thing, but then you got to tack on this other little piece in an effort to hide it, and that's just a little bit about protecting the economy. That's not happening. That's not happening at all. And every member in this House represents an area. We all do. Not everybody has horses, but most of us might, Mr. Chair. We represent every man, woman, child, and the best interests of everything in each of our constituencies, Mr. Chair. Pets. Some of us have pets that are just like children to us. In all honesty, it's unbelievable. We probably all know that. What does this bill do to protect the businesses, the individuals, the men, the women, the children that are working, that are going to school, our schools? What does it do to protect? Where does this piece of the bill even fit, Mr. Chair? And I know you're saying, what's this got to do with the bill? It's got everything to do with the bill. The bill says to protect the economy. Mr. Chair, what is it doing to protect the economy? Not doing a thing. Not doing a thing. That's why we've said, Mr. Chair, amendments are not acceptable. We're not interested in amendments at all. It has to go. That's why when I was asked today, I said no. We wouldn't even be talking about this bill because we'd never introduce it. We'd put legislation on the floor that meant people to something in this province, not a bill that has a threat involved and some risk involved with it. I wonder, Mr. Chair, as I started to say a few minutes ago here, we have businesses in every corner of our province. We all have some business, big or small, in our constituencies. Even if it's a corner store, we all have them. Doesn't matter. Every potential business, Mr. Chair, is at risk with this bill. Now, we may not want to admit this is about unionizing or giving unions extra strength, another little tool, a selling feature, if you will, Mr. Chair, to go out to some of these bigger organizations where they can say, hey, you don't even need to pay anymore. It used to be $2. I don't think you pay anymore at all for a union card. So I'm told, I don't know. But even no matter what it was, if you're interested, we can represent you. And oh, by the way, look, we now have first contract arbitration. And I know that the words, we're going to guarantee you a good deal, are going to be sold right along with that. But you tell me, Mr. Chair, how is that possible? One, how is it even fair? It's not. This bill is not about fairness. Any bill that comes before this House and that is presented should be all about fairness to the people of this province. Every single bill. But this has got nothing to do with fairness. This is supposedly protecting the economy. How? How is that protecting the economy when we're going to go in and we're going to tell businesses in short order, without going through a process that has been in place, a harmonious process that has been in place that has allowed collective bargaining to take place? How are we going to tell employers, oh, by the way, here you go, it's over, just sign here? What will be better, Mr. Chair, what will be better is what if the employer says, no, I don't think so? What happens then? So we're going to fine, or we're going to do something more drastic and undemocratic to the business that doesn't want to agree? What then? Where is this going to drive the whole thing? Well, we don't really know. But once the bill's passed, we're going to find out quick enough, though, I think. I think that we're going to find out. We're going to see businesses, potentially, and I don't think anybody can argue the fact, there's a potential that that business is at risk of not being able to afford the payroll, of not being able to afford the benefits that go along with it. Now, I agree with good benefits. I agree with good payroll. Let's not take this the wrong way. As I said, I was a union negotiator. I was with the union for a lot of years, and I was with the management side for a lot of years. Negotiated contracts, and the very best thing, anybody that sits down to a table on either side of bargaining commits to bargaining in good faith. Mr. Chair. That's the most important thing. Being honest with the other side. And you're always, part of negotiation is trying to figure out what the other guy wants in the end of the day, because nobody ever really wants to get around to it right away. And I would also pose the question, Mr. Chair, is how many days does it actually take? How many days does it actually take of sitting down from day one to signing day to get it done? Well, part of the problem is you've got lawyers who have to fit schedules. You're just one of those clients. You might fit in a month or two down the road, whatever, and you have a labor lawyer, I guess we refer to them as, and I know from having been at the table, there are a number of them, but they're not only looking after business A or union A or B or whatever it might be, they're looking after a whole variety of things like any other would. That's fair. So it takes time to get that scheduled. How will this bill help that? Well, you're saying, well, let's speed it up. So now you're going to hire a whole bunch of new lawyers? Is that what we're going to do? Or we're just going to hire a whole bunch of lawyers to do nothing but contract negotiation? Because if I'm not mistaken, there are literally hundreds of contracts that are out there that are negotiated annually. How many do you have? Exactly. That's right, that word "you" again. My apologies to you, Mr. Chair, and I will refer my questions and points through other members through you, if there are any. So somebody may know on the other side, Mr. Chair, through you, how many contracts are negotiated just on the government side per year. I know that there are a lot, and I just can't remember what the number is from days gone by, but I'm sure the Minister of Health would know how many in her particular department there are in the different unions. Too many, probably, that she's... How many? 300. I knew that it was into the hundreds. Thank you. So go ahead, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Madam Chair, you're back. Nice to see you. Thank you, and welcome to the debate. So always a sideliners there, Madam Chair. We want to get into it. Anyway, Madam Chair, as I was saying, this is a bill that is entitled a Trade Union Act, but it's got on the end of it a little clause. A clause, Madam Chair, that speaks to... he's thrown me right off there, Madam Chair. That speaks to how fair this is to... Okay, we get my voice back here again. Here we go. So, Madam Chair, as I was lost for a minute there in my words, I got distracted by another member walking by there and throwing something at me, I think. But anyway, Madam Chair, just kidding. Throw over 300 contracts just alone that the Minister of Health would have to be part of in some way. That's a lot of contracts to negotiate. That's a lot of lawyers' hours, a lot of dollars, a lot of things that have to be done over the years. I can't imagine for even a minute, having sat on both sides of that table before, that there's any fun in any of that. Madam Chair. But I can tell you, the process, I'm not sure, we talk about the number of days here, and I think back to some of the days when we used to negotiate contracts, even ones that took some time. How many actual days at the table are you there? And it doesn't seem like you're there for very long. In all honesty, you come, you spend a day, and then you're gone for another month maybe, or 30 days, or a couple of months. You come back and you spend another day, and you exchange some more things. And part of that, Madam Chair, I believe, from past experiences, is that there are already a set number of basic clauses that would go into a contract that would be pertinent in every contract. And what it comes down to each and every time are a few of those added perks, the bonuses, if there are any such thing, vacations and holidays and sonorities, and of course wages. And when you get to the end of this bargaining, you're always stuck for those last few days, and it seems to want to go late and around the clock sometimes if it needs to go. And it's all about the wages. So wages are important in negotiations. So the problem that we have here with the first contract arbitration, Madam Chair, is we've skipped a few steps. We haven't allowed time, required time, that employees and employers, but a lot of times employees in first go around, everybody wants the very best. They all want to make top dollars. I mean, everybody understands that. But the company needs an opportunity as well to say, this is really what we can afford. And we've seen examples in other provinces where it hasn't worked out so well, Madam Chair. We need the time to take to negotiate, Madam Chair. And if there's an issue with bad faith bargaining, then we should address the issue with bad faith bargaining. Now, I don't know how many issues or how many of those events, contracts that you would be into where you would have someone actually be found to be in bad faith while sitting at the table. I think that there's a commitment when, for the most part, employees and their employer come together and they want to sit down and they want to talk in good faith. And I think that they commit, I know from being there, they commit to bargaining and trying to reach an agreement in a timely fashion that sometimes takes longer than we would like. But again, I want to go back to something I said a few minutes ago. In the end of the day, how many days are there? Have we even looked at? Has anybody presented? Has anybody spoke to? How many actual days of sitting down and negotiating between the two parties are there? From start to finish, to the contract being signed off, and all of the things that you have to go through. My experience, and sometimes my memory is not so great, but I can tell you I don't remember a time when there was 6 months of solid bargaining. We know that just doesn't happen. How many real days are there? Maybe there's another piece in this bill that needs to be addressed. Or maybe it's just something different altogether. Maybe there's already labor standards code out there for negotiating. Maybe it needs to be amended. We don't believe this bill needs to be on the floor, Madam Chair. So I think that there's still a lot that's been missed even in this bill itself, in the discussion of this bill. What else is out there that could be added, deleted? Well, we say delete it all and start over if you want to put something out there to make bargaining better. I believe personally, bargaining needs to be fair. It needs to be done in a reasonable amount of time. And it should be. There shouldn't be any excuses. 2 years, I started back there a few minutes ago and listening to that presenter and speaking about that presenter. 2 years is a terribly long time. One thing, though, that I didn't hear anybody mention in that presentation, though, was when the contracts are signed, I don't know of any that there isn't retro. So there's a retro for all that time in the 2 years. There'd be an adjustment. So their losses are, well, are they losses? Yeah, there is. Thank you. Because they struggle through for a period of time with no contract, maybe a very small wage, who knows, whereby they would probably go through some hardship. But that is accommodated or looked after to some degree, if that's the right term, and maybe it isn't. But it's made up, generally speaking, in the fact that there is retro pay that comes along with it. So there is this great resolve that everybody does look forward to. And I know from my own experience, that resolve can sometimes be quite a few dollars, and people are counting on that at the end of that collective bargaining because they know that that's coming. Some people look forward to that. So if it takes you a month or 2 months or 6 months, sometimes that does happen, and sometimes more. That, there is a piece there. Is there a way to make that bargaining process better? There's probably always. As a matter of fact, I say probably. I could say there's certainly always ways to make any negotiation better. Maybe it's, as I said, Madam Chair, amendments to something that already exists. Does it take a whole new bill called the Trade Union Act to make bargaining better in the province of Nova Scotia? Given that we've had quite a few years of pretty good bargaining go on, and we've heard from some of those organizations, and the words harmonious bargaining has gone on. Some of it has taken some time. If we want to work on something, let's work on what is the time, what is fair. Do you need a whole new act for that? We don't believe that you do. This is not something new in this province or in this country for that matter, or even in North America and around the world when it comes to bargaining. It's gone on forever, many, many years. I think the member from Glace Bay spoke last night about how many years it's been that Glace Bay was the first to unionize, perhaps. A long, long, long time ago, Madam Chair. And we would never argue that there isn't a place for unions in businesses, in the province, in the country. We've seen times and years go by where they have been of great benefit. And when I spoke before, I spoke about a corporation that I worked for, Arsenal's Ambulance, a long time ago. And when I started, what the pay was. $5 a call in town, $8 a call out of town. $25 was a big day. That was a trip to Halifax. That was a big, big day. You got a couple of them and you did well. What would this bill have done then? Wouldn't have done anything then either. Nothing. It wouldn't have even done anything after we unionized because we went to the table and we sat down and we negotiated and we put in there the things that we wanted. We put in there the things that we think were reasonable. and we still come out of that contract with something like $6 an hour. We thought we were doing pretty good in those days. Compared to a lot of other companies in Nova Scotia, we were doing quite well. But we were working a lot of hours for it. But you didn't work in that business, Madam Chair, and you didn't think about first contract arbitration, and you didn't really think about your wage a whole lot. You didn't work in that business for what you got paid. You worked in that business because it was something you enjoyed, Madam Chair. And I think a lot of people would like to be able to go to work every day and work in a business that they enjoyed, like we do in this House. I think that most of us probably would have to say we enjoy this or we wouldn't be here, Madam Chair. Do we enjoy talking about some of the tougher bills? It has to be done. Do we enjoy being here until 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock at night? It has to be done sometimes. Do we enjoy going on hour after hour about one particular bill that we don't think is right? Well, enjoy is a strong word when you think about that, but you know what, Madam Chair? It has to be done. This bill is the wrong bill for Nova Scotia. This caucus believes that, and we'll stand by that. No, it will pass, as we said. That's unfortunate for the people of this province, for the businesses that are worried. So what I can say on I guess, to this bill as well is knowing that it's going to pass, knowing that it's going to go through, it's going to get royal assent, and it'll probably be one of the quickest bills to ever get through that process. It'll go through third, and it'll probably be stamped quicker than anything that has ever been stamped before, Madam Chair, which is, again, something that we have to think about. But we then have to put some faith in the fact that businesses will educate themselves in this bill, that they will figure out what the risks are when it comes to negotiations. They will figure out what the risks are when it is deciding whether to come to Nova Scotia to do business. Now, we've heard there are a lot of other provinces that have a model of some type of first contract arbitration. We've heard people stand in this House and say that this is the Manitoba model through and through, and that's the wrong model for Nova Scotia. Well, they are two entirely different provinces. They have different businesses, some similar, but some different. They have different economic streams there that they, maybe in the energy sector that's a little different than ours. It doesn't matter. It's all business. They will argue that this is not the right business for this province. Time will only tell now, Madam Chair. Time will tell whether or not there will be people that will decide that they're not going to come to Nova Scotia. How important is that to us and our economy? And it comes back to that piece again, that little blurb on the end of that bill that says protecting the economy. What about growing the economy, Madam Chair? What about growing the economy? You can't protect what you can't grow. You can't protect what you can't grow when it comes to the economy. And there will be people, there are already people, Madam Chair, who are saying, we can't afford to come to Nova Scotia. The taxes are too high, this is too high, that's too high. And now we're going to add one more little piece of risk to this province, to a decision as to whether or not we want to do business here. They will be waiting to see what the risks are or end up being or have been, what kind of damage has been done with a bill that was put through by a majority government who did consult with unions and who came in and supported the NDP position, which is not surprising. But, Madam Chair, there were a number of presenters that came in and spoke against as well, but they didn't listen. And if they did listen, they obviously didn't hear what was said. It's one thing to listen, it's another thing to hear it. And we would argue that government either wasn't listening or didn't hear it, because there's been no changes based on the facts that were presented. And this wasn't just one or two people. This wasn't just a couple of companies that had 10 or 15 people, not that that's not important. These are companies with thousands of people who came to present, thousands of people working for them. You know, you look at Michelin, who we've heard before today, thousands of people, just in that one alone. Are they going to be thinking about whether there'll be future investment? We need their future investment in this place. And I've been in those plants. It was interesting. I was in the plant in Granton back a number of years ago, and I worked in Pictou County. It's around 99, 2000, somewhere there. And I remember taking a tour of that very plant. And the guy said, he sniffed a couple of times. He said, "You smell that?" And I said, "Yes." I said, "What is it?" He said, "That's the smell of money." Those were his comments. And he said, "You know why? Because this is a good place to do business. Nova Scotia is a good place to do business." Well, we are hopeful that the fishing industry, as the Honourable Minister of Fisheries, Madam Chair, has just commented, we are hoping they are going to have a good season. There's a lot of lobster coming in, but the prices are low. What does that have to do with this bill? Are people fearful of what this is doing? Hope not. Does it have any bearing? How is that protecting the economy? Again, what does this bill got to do with any of that? Those words in that bill, protecting the economy and first contract arbitration, just don't seem to go together when you talk to these business people. Why is that? This is supposed to be a bill that's meaningful, Madam Chair. But nobody's asking for it. There's the stranger part. This has been a bill, a very strange timing. Maybe the NDP just wanted to put a bill forward so that they'd have something to do for 2 or 3 weeks in the House, Madam Chair, because they've put nothing else forward by way of legislation that's been of any value. When you look at it, a word change here, a word change there. There's been a couple of education bills come through, and there's been a couple of good things in that. There's been a transportation bill that's been put through the floor of this House. There's been a couple of good things in that. But you know what, Madam Chair? There's been nothing else put through here. It's a good thing we've had this bill to talk about for 3 weeks, in some ways, because there'd be nothing else to talk about. But unfortunately, here we are talking about something, again, wasting the people's time, in my opinion, because it shouldn't be on the floor of this House at all. On the Bowater bill was put forward today. Just think, though, there's a bill that didn't even need to go through legislation. Other investments have been made, Madam Chair. But here we are. That's okay. It'll go. But, Madam Chair, how is Bill 102, is that the right number? Bill 102. We've been talking about it so long, I almost forgot the number of it. Should be ingrained in my head by now. Madam Chair, here's a bill that has nothing to do with protecting the economy. It did nothing to protect the Hart store in Windsor that just closed. It's doing nothing to protect the store I started to talk about in Mo's Music. It's helping them zero. It's not going to do a thing for them. What about going down through the valley? We have Mason's Apples. What's it going to do to protect them? Nothing. What's it going to do to protect any of them? Here we have businesses. We have the Sobey Empire over there in Pictou County, as we heard about earlier. I'm sure they have to be talking to those 3 members from Pictou County. I can't imagine. Those are some pretty intelligent folks over there and running big corporations who are saying, member, what's going on in your government? How does a bill like this make us long-term sustainable without risk? What are you thinking about? Those are the comments we're getting. What are the answers? Unfortunately, nobody's standing up to talk about the answers. Perhaps, though, perhaps we're going to get a great surprise, Madam Chair. Perhaps in the end of this session, in the end of Committee of the Whole House, perhaps the Honourable Minister or someone is going to stand over there somewhere in a reading, and they're going to talk for an hour or 2 or 3. We'll make sure there's time left. There's 20 hours to debate this bill. We'll give them an hour. We'll give them all the time they want to stand up and tell us why it's such a great bill, what they're going to do to protect the economy, or how this bill is going to protect the economy. It'll be an interesting time to listen to how that's all going to go, Madam Chair, because I don't think they're going to do it. If they were, they would have. We've offered them the opportunity before, but they chose not to take it, Madam Chair. But they need to take it because they need to inform Nova Scotians. They need to inform the employees, not just the businesses owners like the Sobeys, the Michelins, and others. They need to talk directly to the employees, not just us. They don't need to talk to us at all if they don't want. They need to talk to the employees of these companies. And they need to tell them, because I'm sure they're sitting back wondering too. Where are Well Garments? I think of the member over there, I'm looking at him from Pictou County. I'm sure he's heard from them. What do you think Mr. McLean is saying? I'm sure he's not jumping up and down, saying, hey, bring it in, this is a great thing, this is going to protect the economy, this is going to make me survive for years. He's a guy who hires a lot of people, constantly. What's this bill going to do to help wear well garments? It's not going to do anything, Madam Chair. We heard stories this afternoon, they referenced, I believe it was a member from Lunenburg West and businesses in that area. What about your area, Madam Chair? Cole Harbour Eastern Pastures is the right constituency name, and beautiful place that it is. I always enjoy a little tour out there once in a while. What is Bill 102 going to do to protect the businesses in your constituency? I'm sure they're asking. I'm sure they must have called you, emailed you. There may have even been presenters from that area, Madam Chair, and law amendments. I don't know. But what is it going to do to protect that area? It's not going to do anything. Nothing. What's it going to do in Halifax Citadel, Sable Island? What's it going to do to protect all the constituents out there? Not going to do anything. This bill will do nothing to protect the economy in Sable Island. Not one thing. What's it going to mean to the people who have businesses in Halifax? What's it going to mean to them? Are they calling you? Are they asking? I'll bet they are. I know what it's going to mean in Truro, Madam Chair, because we've already heard from the folks over there. They're not happy. But they're going to have recourse, Madam Chair. There will be recourse. There's going to be an election one day soon. On Sable Island too. And not soon enough, Madam Chair, I will state, not soon enough will it come. These are the kinds of things, although we may not think about it, Madam Chair, bills like 102, bills like 100, they'll not be forgotten. They may die down after they've passed through and the government members think, okay, well, there, that's over with. We've gone through the pain of hour after hour after hour of having to listen to the opposition talk. Well, that's part of how this place works, and that's okay. Everybody, I think, agrees that's okay. It's informative. It's quite an education session. It is that. But the people will remember, Madam Chair. They will remember Bill 102, because we're going to remind them if we have to. They are the ones who are going to feel the pain. Those business owners are the ones who are going to be worrying about the risk. As I said, this will pass through. It's going to go. We need to hope, and hope is all there's going to be left, Madam Chair, because there's nothing else. Hope. That's it.
Hope against hope.
Hope against hope, he says. Hope that nothing will deter those businesses from not coming that may. It's hard to hang that sign out there at the border in Amherst that says, welcome to Nova Scotia. There should be another big sign that says, we're open for business. I said that before in this house. Pretty hard to hang that sign, though, because we're really not open for business with bills like this. Bad legislation like this says, no, you might as well put, welcome to Nova Scotia, but we're not open for business because we've got legislation that prevents businesses from coming, deters them from coming here and wanting to set up. Why? Bill 100, Bill 102, 15%. What else? Sign couldn't be big enough. Probably would have some regulation says it can't be this or it can't be that. Wouldn't have enough room for it all. You'd have to have a whole row of them, Madam Chair. People are paying attention outside of Nova Scotia that are interested in coming here to work. Nova Scotians are paying attention, whether we think that they are or not. Are paying attention to this bill because it has potential to affect them. But what's in it? Again, there's that little tag on the end. Maybe that was the sales pitch. Protecting the economy was the tag on the end. Maybe you should have just left that off and saved some of the grief that goes along with this bill, because it represents nothing. Not one person that came in there to speak to this bill said anything about protecting the economy in this bill. We refused to listen, or we listened but we didn't hear. We refused to hear what was being said. And what's worse is what's the rush? How many contracts are waiting? Can somebody answer that, Madam Chair, through you to every member over there? Can somebody answer how many contracts are waiting to be negotiated that are in great length of time that need to be addressed right now? Nobody can probably answer that right off. Madam Chair, is it important? Yes, it's important. We've said that. It's important to get to collective bargaining. It's important to be fair in collective bargaining. There's nothing more important than fairness of collective bargaining. This bill does nothing to help the fairness of collective bargaining. It speeds it right up. Something will be missed. There's going to be a loser. It could be both parties. Have we taken the time to consider that? I'm not sure that we have. What's the rush? As I said, Madam Chair, I put forward a hoist motion in this place. It was unfortunately defeated. It's too bad because it made sense. Those aren't things you do lightly. You don't make those motions on a whim. You think about this long and hard. You hear from thousands of people. There's a reason. It's not like hearing from 50 or 60 people, maybe, not that every voice isn't important, out of 900,000+ people. When you're hearing from thousands of people, it's important to stand up for them people and put forward motions like the hoist that matter. Give it the time that it needs. Go back out there. You're all good at doing polls. All these politicians, everybody pays a lot of attention to polls. Go out there and poll the people in Nova Scotia and ask them, does Bill 102 matter to you? Yeah, what does it matter? We want to invest. We want to invest, he says, in protecting the economy. Does nothing to protect the economy. It's funny, we didn't worry about protecting the economy in Yarmouth, Madam Chair. We haven't worried too much about protecting the economy anywhere from what I can see. This bill talks about protecting the economy. Where? How? Don't know. Biggest piece of this is hurrying up and getting a collective bargaining process in place and bang, 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 get her through, and there you go. Well, Madam Chair, again, it comes back to that fairness issue. How is that fair to either side? It's not fair to either side, Madam Chair. Not at all. Rushing anything, you're going to miss some of the best pieces. And we already know from experience, they go to the table, how many days do they actually sit to go through to negotiate that contract? How many real days do they go in there and sit? And I know from negotiating contracts that you're not in there a whole lot of days. It may take you maybe 6 or 8 months or whatever it might take to negotiate a contract, but if you count the number of days that you actually spent negotiating that contract, they're not long days. I don't know what the number is, but I would be willing to bet that it's not a great, big, large number. Now, I stand to be corrected on that. If there's somebody watching that would like to advise me otherwise, or if there's a member on the other side that knows the answer to that question, that's fine. We're open to hearing that. But at the same time, it's important to make sure that it gets done and done properly. And I would repeat again, I'm not sure how much time I have left, Madam Chair. What's time on the clock there?
6 minutes.
How many minutes?
No, just 8 minutes.
8 minutes. I'll let you.
Less than 8 now. Nope, 7.
7. Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you. I have 7 minutes, and I was only going to talk for a couple of minutes. I haven't realized it's been going on that long already. But these are important facts to make, important points to make, Madam Chair. Very important points to make. The collective bargaining process has to be fair. Nobody would argue that. The ability to go and sign a union card and become a member of a union has to be free, fair, and democratic. Nobody would argue that. People gave their lives for this country, this province, to make that the democratic society that we live in. Fortunately, as we all know, that's not something that we see around the world. It's important that those rights remain. I see collective bargaining as an opportunity for democracy to be freely at work, Madam Chair. Totally freely at work. Some may argue that point, but you have the right to go and sit at a table. You have the right to sit there and to say as you wish on behalf of those you represent, whether it's employees or employers. Bring to the table, have a frank discussion. What do you want? What can we give you? What's wrong with that process? There's nothing wrong with that process, except I agree when I see that young lady who came in to present at Law Amendments talking about being 2 years, nearly 2 years out. That's too long. I agree with that 100%. But there's other ways of making that process better without putting in legislation like Bill 102, Madam Chair, and trying to tag on and protecting the economy when it has nothing to do with protecting the economy. It's got to do with the ability to grow what some would say is a union movement. I'm not sure that it does, but it certainly opens the door. Certainly opens the door for that to happen. Big or small businesses. It's already there. You don't need it. Doesn't matter how big or small the business is. You don't need to say, here you go. What's the advantage? You can sign that union card anytime you want freely. Unions can go and seek it out. Nothing stops them. Nothing stops me as an employee to call a union and say, come on down, let's chat about this or that. There's nothing there. Don't understand what the issue is here. It's not a good bill for Nova Scotia. It puts employers at risk, and it puts employees at risk in the end of the day. And Madam Chair, I know my time is getting close. I've only got a few minutes left. And I'll close here shortly. Oh, you didn't want me to close. You're the honourable member over there to keep going. Well, we can keep going for a little while longer, but I know I'm limited to an hour, unfortunately. We'd probably go a little longer than that if we wanted to. But anyway, maybe. Madam Chair, it's important to get across that there are businesses that are paying attention to this. There are employees in large groups that are paying attention to this who don't want it. Michelin is just one of those examples. 13 times that they've tried and they've said no. Will this change that? Will this make it easier? Who knows, because we don't know what the real risks are. But it's going to open the door again. It's going to open it strongly. It's going to be kicked right open and say, come on in. Those employees obviously have some concerns. The ownership of big business has some concerns. But nobody, although they listened, didn't hear or didn't care, or we wouldn't be talking about it to the degree that we are, and we may have some changes or it may be eliminated. or maybe eliminate it, Madam Chair. The bill doesn't need to be here. We can create better bargaining if there's an issue with bargaining or a said-to-be issue with bargaining, and that one example that I did listen to, I believe, is a great example. There should be rules around, you know, how to make that better. If we want to talk about good negotiation, let's talk about how to make what we have, which has been pretty good, but let's talk about how to make it even better. You don't need legislation like this to do that. But I want to go back, Madam Chair, to the minute or two I have left, and I want to talk about Mo's Music one more time before I close, because they're one small example, and they're a local example. And maybe nobody really cares, but I care because they're my constituency and they're good business people, Madam Chair. They deserve to be heard, and they've invited. They want to see the Premier. They'd love to see the Premier come down. Take the time, because during the election, Madam Chair, the Premier was in Windsor, and he'd go up the street. But he won't come back because he doesn't want to hear about things like Bill 100. He does not want to hear about Bill 102 and how it's not a good bill. It's hard probably to swallow your pride and say, maybe we've got it wrong, Madam Chair. Maybe we've got it wrong. Maybe we can fix that bill, Madam Chair. Maybe we can. There is an opportunity if we want it to fix it. Do we need it? Do we need it? No, we don't need it. Can we make it better? Let business people like Willard Wood and Edgar Card sit down. I sit down with them all the time and chat about different issues. Why doesn't the Premier come out? Why doesn't the Minister come out? Sit down. Let them tell them why this bill doesn't work. Don't listen to me. You don't have to take all what we're saying for it. Come out and talk to them people that you don't want to do that. Come out and talk to them people and say to them, tell me what's wrong with this bill. There's nothing wrong with that. We say that we're a consultative government. Well, we know, okay, if we are, let's go out. We're talking to those people. What stops the ministry, the Executive Council, who are putting these bills in place from coming out and doing that? Nothing stops them. They've even asked, bring the Premier. We want to talk to him, Madam Chair. When's he coming? Well, we know he's not going to come out. I wish he would. We'd welcome him to Windsor to talk to them people. We'd welcome him to talk to all the different businesses on the street. Bigger businesses, manufacturing businesses, smaller businesses, sales business, car sales businesses, Madam Chair. Doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't have to be something negative all the time. It doesn't. Nobody's going to jump up and down and scream and holler and go on. These are very educated, smart people. They want to sit down. They're business people. They want to have a conversation. They want their opportunity, Madam Chair, to speak and tell you and the Premier and all of the members, for that matter, and government in general, they want to be able to tell you why this is the wrong bill for Nova Scotia and it's not needed. If we have an issue, let's talk about that issue. Let's figure out another way to fix it. There's probably a very reasonable way to fix it. Well, Madam Chair, unfortunately, I've burned up an hour and it's gone by so quick. So with those very few comments, Madam Chair, I'll say thank you very much, and I will take my place and get up and adjourn. Get up and adjourn.
Thank you. As we're approaching the moment of interruption, the Committee of the Whole House on Bills will now rise and report progress to the House.
Say clerk. Order. The chair reports
that the Committee of the Whole House on Bills has made considerable progress, and begs leave to sit again.
Is it agreed? Thank you. We've now reached the hour of interruption, and the subject matter was chosen earlier and reads, therefore be it resolved, the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism take the advice of his federal cousins and start getting concerned about the job losses under his watch. I will now recognize the honourable member for Cape Breton North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm happy to rise today to participate in this debate submitted by the honourable member from Cumberland South. And the debate reads, therefore be it resolved that the Minister of Economic and Rural Development and Tourism take the advice of his federal cousin and start getting concerned about job losses under his watch. Well, Mr. Speaker, the NDP love to stand in the House and pretend that their Jobs Here plan has been very successful. Their plan started with a slogan, a better deal for today's families. Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't know if the NDP government has different definition of today than I do, but we know for certain the families they're referring to when they started that campaign certainly aren't any better off now. Just ask the people in rural Nova Scotia who've lost their jobs if they feel they're better off now. I know 1,300 people in Cape Breton and on the North Shore who've lost their jobs or given up hope don't feel they're better off now. The 2,200 in the Valley don't feel they're better off now. Mr. Speaker, Nova Scotians feel like they're being taxed to death. They don't feel like they're getting the bang for their buck that they work so hard for. And that buck, that dollar, is not going near as far as it used to. They're paying more tax on most things they buy and use most today. The very things we need to survive. The things that are essential for families of today. They worry about jobs for themselves and their children and their grandchildren and for the future generations. Will they be able to survive and remain in this province to earn a living and raise their family? I know I'd love to see my family educated here, stay here to work and raise their family. I'd love to see grandchildren stay here. But a lot of us on this side fear that that's not going to be the case. Mr. Speaker, they worry about economic development and our small towns being able to sustain themselves. They watch and read week after week of job losses in the rural area of Nova Scotia, a crisis which Stats Canada tells us has now even spread beyond the rural areas. Now, with potentially dangerous labour legislation, employers and employees throughout the province are concerned, worried about who could be brought in to make the decisions in their business, decisions that will affect how they do business here. How will their business survive? And how will the future businesses look at investment here? We're hearing in the Law Amendments Committee about how they are concerned about it and how it will affect their business and how it will affect jobs and their own investment. Nova Scotians know it won't help create new jobs, and they worry even more that it will affect the few jobs we still have in this province. I tell you, Mr. Speaker, the NDP are not working to protect the economy of Nova Scotia. The most recent reports show that Cape Breton and the North Shore have lost 1,300 jobs, as I just said, in the last year. The southern region fared off even worse, lost 1,700 jobs in the last year.